duty lineup today with us here this evening. Balchandra Mungekar, Congress MP of the Rajya Sabha, who was a member of the panel on the goods and services tax, also, as I pointed out, of that select committee. His Rajya Sabha colleague, also his colleague in the GST panel, and independent MP Rajeev Chandrasekhar with us, and we'll also be joined by Satya, Poddar, tax expert with EY. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here. Mr. Mungekar, let me start by asking you for your first comments. The Congress party has been demanding a low rate of 18%. The CEA panel has recommended a revenue-neutral range of 15 to 15.5% and a standard rate of 17 to 18%. Are you happy with that?
I'm not at all happy for one simple reason. First of all, let us understand very clearly that Congress is the author of this GST bill. It was Congress initiative, it is Congress innovation. Second, now I don't understand the argument of Mr. Jayant Sinha and Mr. Arvind Subramanian for a very simple reason. If they don't want one specific rate in the constitutional amendment bill, say for example 18%, then where is the question of this fluctuating range of between 17 and 18%? Ultimately 17 and 18% rather than one specific rate of 18%, you will be having your recommendation is between 17 and 18%. That means you are giving range. But range also giving the lower and upper limit ultimately in terms of numbers. Third, now what we are doing is the basic idea is converting entire Indian Union, entire nation into one common market. And once you are giving the range, and if suppose tomorrow the range is fluctuating for different states, then earlier we are having the whole GST concept and innovation is to avoid the multiplicity of tax structure. Now, Mr. Arvind Subramanian's report is suggesting multiplicity of the same standard rate. My only point is that everybody wants its own footprint. Congress will not take any adamant stand. We shall negotiate into this. But just to annihilate, just to kill, just to have its own way, rather than 18%, 7 to 18%, so that they don't want
but if I can interrupt you, sir, if I can interrupt you and put to you the argument that has been made by the Chief Economic Advisor on the reasons for the conditional rate structure, because he says that it will depend on the exemptions that the centre will try and do away with, which are currently pegged at 300 versus 90 at the state level, as well as the taxation for certain commodities like precious metals, and hence the conditional rate structure. He's also in his report gone on to say that India should strive towards a one-rate structure, but at this point in time, the committee has recommended 2 rates.
No, what happens is once you are suggesting one specific rate, and their main worry is that we shall be requiring to amend the constitution time and again. I don't think this kind of fear and apprehension we can bring so far the GST rate is concerned. You know, after constitution was adopted on 26 January 1950, within 6 months the first amendment came so far the land reforms were concerned. That's why this kind of continuing.
So you're saying, sir, that the Congress Party's position on inclusion of the rate into the constitution is non-negotiable. But what about the rate itself, the revenue-neutral rate of between 15 to 15.5% and the standard rate? Your quick comment on that before I get the other panelists, and then I'll come back to you.
No, I think Congress party will be taking in the entire holistic view and take a considerate view on the recommendations of the committee once we meet together.
All right, Rajeev Chandrasekhar, a quick word from you on what you've heard from the Arvind Subramanian panel, a range as far as the GST revenue neutral rate is concerned between 15 to 15.5%, a low rate at 12% and a standard rate of 17 to 18%. There are some concerns though, Rajeev, and I wanted to get your comments in on the demerit rate, which is as high as 40%.
Yeah, Shireen, I think the CEA's report coming as it does now addresses a lot of the concerns that were raised during the consultations that the select committee held, which is one is the cascading effect of the 1% tax, the distortion that it brings in. There was obviously a lot of concern about what this effective rate would be, effective tax would be, which the Congress has raised in its dissent note. And of course, there was this whole issue of dispute resolution. Now, and the fourth one was this thing about leaving alcohol and fuel out of the ambit of GST completely in the act. So I think the CEA, in a sense, has addressed all of them. But the problem here, Shireen, is that this remains one more report, because there has been a myriad of reports on the GST. The act is in front of the Parliament today is an act that has come through a process of state consultation. And if we have to tinker with the act now, we are essentially looking at going back to the states with whatever re-architecting that we want to do. I personally happen to think the 1% going away is a good idea. I think the revenue neutral rate of about 18% is a good idea. I think the fact that if we can come to an agreement on the dispute resolution mechanism and the fact and a commitment that fuel and alcohol will be brought into GST at some point with the GST Council, these are all good things. Now, for the Congress's position on 18% is inarguable. I think they are completely correct in saying that the number should not be high. But where I differ from them is that you don't need to have that in the Constitution. We can effectively get a government commitment on the floor of the House that says that this shall be the effective rate, and that should be enough if the Congress is legitimately concerned about the rate going up and down in the future.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, but I don't see the Congress at this point in time yielding ground on that demand. Several Congress ministers, former ministers, including the former Finance Minister Chidambaram, on my show has very categorically stated that that is not an issue they're willing to negotiate on. He said it's not a bazaar, that they can negotiate on that point. But let me bring in Satya Poddar, and let's talk about this from a tax perspective, Mr. Poddar. On the back of what you've heard from the CA's panel today, in terms of the rate structure, and, you know, while the headline will scream a revenue neutral rate as far as 15 to 15.5% is concerned, the standard rate is 17 to 18%. A lot of that will depend, as the CA says, on the rationalization of exemptions.
Well, first of all, I must say that the CA report is extremely bold and balanced. It's almost like a Supreme Court verdict on very controversial and politically charged discussions and debates that have taken place. And the CA panel has been extremely bold in giving an honest and objective opinion about number of flaws of the Constitution bill. And it's not appropriate to just focus on the R&R rate. The CA is explicitly saying that R&R rate depends upon the scope of the GST and what exemptions are provided. Today we are living in an exemption Raj. And as a result, we have a system with very high tax rates and very low revenue being generated because of the exemptions we have. So CA is recommending explicitly that the low tax rate of gold and precious metals be re-examined.
Right.
Even the exemption for health and education should be re-examined. There should be no exclusion for alcohol, real property, electricity, and petroleum. So you can't talk about the single issue of R&R rates. And if you have a broad base, then in fact the rate can be much lower than 15.5. 15.5 is estimated on the basis that the base will not be broadened enough. And your point about should the rate be legislated in the Constitution and left outside, if the rate was substantially below 18%, then I could see the logic of not enshrining the rate in the Constitution itself. But in the structure that that was taken as given, the rate is barely below 18%. And even now, you can get to 18% only if you tax some goods at a very high tax rate of 40%.
That's right.
So I really have no hope that the government will stick to the 80% ceiling if you don't put it in the Constitution.
So you would like them to put it into the Constitution? You would like them to put it into the Constitution, Mr. Poddar?
Either they should remove all the exemptions and exclusions from the Constitution bill, including alcohol, petroleum, and other items, electricity, or they should go ahead with the 18% as an absolute tax rate, because otherwise I really have no faith. If the governments were benevolent and they were marching on a path of truly transformational tax reform for the country, then of course you don't need the ceiling of 18%. But as it is, our discussions are completely derailed on the GST design. What was meant to be an ideal GST that will give a boost of 2 percentage points to GDP is turning out to be an absolute disaster. And
you're saying it's turning out to be
explicitly saying
Yeah. Yes, he's explicitly saying many things, include what you've left out into the ambit of the GST, including things like electricity, petrol, alcohol, etc. He is, of course, making those recommendations. But Mr. Mungekar, before I get to you about what we could change as far as the current architecture is concerned, is this really going to fly in this session of Parliament, you think?
No, see what happens is, first of all, Congress made it stand clear that Congress definitely being the author of the bill, we shall be as far as possible to the maximum extent accommodative. But on certain issues, as it was just now mentioned, when the questions about there are a number of issues, as Chandrasekhar was mentioning, the GST dispute settlement mechanism, we want separate independent authority and not the powers to be given to the GST Council. For example, we want permanent GST compensation fund. We want 5-year continuous and complete compensation to the paid to the states to neutralize their revenue loss and all other things. Now, so far 18%, why 18% should be, as now just now mentioned. See, basically, when we are not abiding by the constitutional obligations, how to believe in any government tomorrow for that matter? Maybe it is the Congress or BJP or any government for that matter. The fear is because of the exigencies, because of the drought condition, because of the loss of the revenue, because of the fiscal profligacy, tomorrow it will be quite possible and easy to go to relatively higher rate than 18%. And that is why removing all exemptions, etc., bringing tobacco, electricity, you make 18% standard rate without beating around the bush. I think that is legitimate suggestion, but that also taking into account all other provisions of the report, Congress will take a proper stand.
All right. Rajeev, Chandrasekhar, a quick word from you. What does your gut tell you today? You know, the finance minister has several times said that a compromised GST is worse than taking forward the GST altogether. At this point in time, what we're hearing from tax experts is that this is a compromised GST. Be that as it may, do you see hope for it in this session?
No, and look, I think I've said this on your show many times, and I've said this before. This is a compromised GST. I've never said that this is a perfect GST. Your expert on the panel has pointed out exactly the issues that make it imperfect. And really the choice is, do we start in this manner or keep pushing and kicking the ball ahead, looking for this, utopian perfect GST? And that's a call that the political leadership of both these parties have to take. I would argue that we must get started and evolve this as we go along, because I have seen too many things in Delhi get kicked down the road and never happen. I think GST is something that we have a tryst with it, and we must move down the road with expeditious, minimum delay. I would still like to see GST April 2016 have a GST, even if it is imperfect.
Okay, Satya, Poddar, in a minute, what would be the red flags that you would be watching out for? You said the recommendations made by Arvind Subramaniam are bold, but these are recommendations. Let's be clear about that. What would be the red flags? And do you really believe that April 1, 2016 is a dead timeline?
April 2016 is not an achievable timeline, regardless of when the constitutional bill is approved in this session or the next session. And my own feeling is that, as Mr. Sinha mentioned in his comments, Constitution is a principles document. And on the basis of the principles, let's have the principle of the broadest possible base. Even if you choose not to have a perfect GST, let that choice be made in the GST law, not in the Constitution.
Okay.
So I hope that consideration
is taken on board. Let me bring in a quick corporate reaction. Nadir Godrej also joins us. Mr. Godrej, appreciate you joining us. These are recommendations, as we've been pointing out through the evening. It's just another nudge towards the GST. There is still no clarity on the eventual rollout. But your quick comment on the rates that have been announced.
First of all, I'm very happy that something is happening in GST and that the 1% tax is gone. Those are very good moves. The standard rate seems to be a bit on the high side to me, because with GST, compliance will be better. GDP growth could be higher, so revenues would improve. So I would have preferred a lower rather than a higher rate. That there can be a lot of dynamic increases in revenue. And since the government has so many public sector stocks in its possession, boosting their valuation is of great value to the government. In the kind of situation the government of India is, it should go in for lower tax rather than higher tax. Great.
Well, you know, we were thinking of 24 and 26%. So at this point in time, 17 to 18% certainly seems to be on the lower side. But Nadir, Godrej, Satya, Poddar, Rajeev, Chandrasekhar, and Mr. Mungekar, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Another step forward in the road to the GST, but still no clarity on the eventual rollout. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18.